Welcome to the April edition of What's New in Sigma. Today we have an embedded special edition. Hi everyone, thanks for joining. We're going to give everyone else just a few minutes, a minute or so that they can join. So please hang tight and we will get started shortly. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Scott Hedrick, and I'm Director of Product Marketing at Sigma, and I will be your moderator for today's What's New in Sigma webinar. Today, we are focused on using Sigma for embedded analytics, so moving beyond static embeds to a much richer embedded analytics solution. And as always, we have our amazing Sigma expert, Senior Director of Solution Architecture and Evangelism, Jon Avrach. Jon will take you through Sigma for Embedded, including some new Sigma features that will further enhance the capabilities of Sigma for embedded use cases. A couple of housekeeping items to cover first. We are recording this webinar, and you'll receive an email with a link afterwards. So if you want to replay it or share it with anybody, you'll have that handy. They also get posted on our website for folks that want to find it later. If you have questions, please go to the GoToWebinar questions panel, and you can type in your questions as we go. And so we'll try and pause at the end of some of the sections to answer questions relevant to the content. And then at the very end, we'll address any additional questions that we have time for in a Q&A section. You'll also see in GoToWebinar that there's a handouts panel, and there's a PDF with some links to resources that you may find useful as well. So before we jump into Jon's presentation and demos of the new features, we have a couple of quick poll questions for you, so we can better understand who's joining us today and adjust the talk track to match the audience. So here's the first one. You should see it here on your screen. What is your role in using Sigma? And please just quickly select one of the following options. You see them there: BI administrator, BI analyst or manager, both of those, or a business user. So I'll give it a few more seconds. If you could go ahead and make the selection of what fits you the best, that would be great. Okay, almost everybody's voted. We'll close it out and let me show you the results. So it looks like today we have a lot of people that are both BI administrators and BI managers or analysts. And then the next, I guess, is analysts, business users, and BI administrators. Okay, interesting. So let me show you, we're next going to go to one more quick poll. And this one is about how long have you been using Sigma? So just choose one. If you're brand new, or you've been using it 1 to 3 months, or 3 months to a year, or over a year. Just quickly pick what matches you the best, and then we can get started. All right, we have a majority of folks now. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and show you the results. So it looks like almost everybody is under a year, and the sweet spot seem to be kind of newer users in the first few months. But a few people that have been either brand new or been using Sigma a bit longer. Okay, great. Well, I think that this content will be valuable to anybody who's using Sigma, especially if you're either developing or considering embedded use cases. All right, fantastic. Well, with that, with those polls, I will go ahead and hand this over to Jon to get started. Jon, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Scott. Hello, everyone. My name is Jon Avrach, and welcome to the April edition of What's New in Sigma And for this webinar, we are going to be focusing exclusively on embedding, all things embedded in Sigma. And I've been with, a little background here, I've been with Sigma almost 2.5 years now, and I would say about a year and a half, 2 years ago, Sigma came out with our first embedding offering back when, before we even had workbooks, when we were just doing dashboards. And that was mainly static dashboard embedding. And I've been very close to our embedding solution ever since then. And our embedding has gone from a very static dashboard experience all the way to where we are now, which I'll show you in just a few minutes, where we can embed most of the Sigma application, which you can externalize to your customers. So we keep expanding our embedding offerings. We have more and more customers that are using this as their primary use case. And one of the things I find interesting is I saw the poll of most people are with Sigma here on the call today are under a year, a few that are over a year, but even customers that have been with Sigma for quite some time, a lot of times I talk to them and they don't even know we have embedding. And so for this session, we'll focus on embedding. You'll see that not only do we have embedding, but we have a really solid embedding offering, which you can create different experiences, and it's very much enterprise grade. So we handle object and row level security in very novel ways. So let's go through the agenda. We have quite a bit of content today. And again, I appreciate you taking the time to join. If you do have the ability to stick around for the entire hour, I do think that you'll find this is going to be very informative on all things embedding. So first, we'll cover off what is embedding, walk through some practical use cases on it, embedding experiences, as well as just talking about whether it's a curated experience or the ability to drill down and explore, or the ability to embed most of the Sigma application and how you throttle that. So we'll go over what that looks like. What can be embedded, visualizations, dashboards, entire workbooks with multiple pages, and then dive into the mechanics of embedding, like what the different types of embedding are, the different embedding modes, and how you embed. There's a lot of interesting content here, but it doesn't stop there. We're going to go through, do a deep dive into the embedded URL. So as you'll see when I walk through the slides, and I'll also go into a deep dive demo on this. The entire embedding, provisioning, the authentication, the authorization, it's all handled through the URL. So we're going to spend a lot of time looking at that embedded URL. URL controls, whether you're using embedding or even not using embedding, you can pass filters and parameters in through the URL. Little known fact, it's a very powerful capability that Sigma has. We'll talk all about row level security. If you're embedding externally for your customers, you are going to want to have row level security, and everyone's row level security looks different. Sigma has a lot of different mechanisms to handle this, so we'll go over what that looks like. JavaScript hooks, when you're embedding, you want to be able to communicate with the embed, so our hooks allow you to do that. For development to production, this is the code life cycle of embedding. Like, what does that look like? For customizing the look and feel of your embed, we talk about workbook themes, like changing fonts and colors and button styles and spacing, that kind of things. On the security side, the app embedding keys. This is where the embedding journey begins, is you have to generate a secret key. And then I have some quick links on documentation. A doc on application embedding. I often talk to customers early on in sales cycles who will look at the documentation, and I get on a call with them and they say, yep, I pretty much know how it works. The doc is really good. It has sample code in there. It's very extensive on how the embedding works. So it's a really good supplement to this webinar here. And finally, we'll do a word about licensing, because this can be a little confusing. Like, can I use this embedding today? Does my license cover it? So we'll touch a little bit upon that. So first we start off what is actually embedding mean with Sigma. So on the right-hand side, I have a very simple illustration of maybe you have an application or a customer portal where your customers log in. This doesn't have to be just for external embedding. We'll cover internal as well, but most of today's conversation will be about external embedding. But let's say you have a customer application, your customers log in today, and maybe you have some analytics in that customer portal. Maybe you have none, or maybe you're looking to augment it, maybe you're looking to replace it, whatever the case may be. you have the ability to embed Sigma into your application in a very secure way using an iframe. And iframe is the mechanism that Sigma uses to embed. A lot of people say, well, do you have an SDK? Can I embed components? The answer is no. We embed through iframes. And this makes the embed experience very quick to get up and running. So the time to value is an important benefit to Sigma embedding. And there's two parts to this quick to develop. One is it's quick to develop a workbook with all your visualizations and analytics, and it's quick to deploy it because it's being deployed as an iframe. Now, an iframe may not be the most flexible structure in the world compared to like JavaScript components, let's say, but it is a very powerful mechanism to get embedded analytics to your customers very quickly and to stay on top of where your application needs to take you. So time to value is a very important part of Sigma embedding. It's a common theme we have. Security is another facet here, and security applies to you have different customers, and you want to be able to give them they should only be able to see their own data. So this could mean you may have a giant schema where all your customer data is stored, and you want to secure it by row. Each customer sees different rows of data, all driven off of a common workbook. Or you may have data that's sitting in different schemas, different databases, like a multi-tenanted type of security. And Sigma can handle both of these different flavors. So security, multi-tenant security is a core theme to Sigma embedding. And another core theme is around the ease of integration, particularly with your authentication. So a lot of customers will come to me and they'll say, I'm using a separate identity provider for my external users, or I have my own custom proprietary authentication mechanism. I'm using OAuth for my external authentication on my website. They ask me, do we support that? And the answer is very simple here. Yes, we support all methods of authentication. We don't care if it's proprietary or not. And the reason why is that all the authentication is driven by a signed URL. This is a very clean and simple solution, which means we can just integrate with your existing authentication. This means you don't have to replumb the security mechanism of your website. So the embedding is really designed to work with your existing application. And we also offer a wide range of experiences. So whether you want to just have a curated dashboard, or if you want to give people the ability to explore those dashboards or workbooks a little bit, or if you want to give them the ability to create their own new ones and save them and share and schedule, we can accommodate that experience as well. And you can mix all of these different experiences together. So you can really have quite a rich analytics offering that gets embedded. So some of the ways which we've seen embedding used. First is the status quo, which is other people, maybe you have competitors, other people are embedding, other companies are embedding, people are embedding to have analytics offerings. Customers expect to have their data available. So if you're sitting on top of some valuable data, your customers want it. There is this notion that kind of people expect it to be there. So you can offer essential analytics on your site. This could be as simple as just a curated dashboard where they can't really explore on it. Then you may also want to offer like a base level and a premium analytics offering. So kind of a hybrid solution where you give some people included with your offering, included with your portal, you give them the ability to do analytics at no additional charge, kind of just included. And then there's also a premium option where if you want to upsell them, you could give them the ability to explore or schedule or do alerts or share. So you can kind of have like a lightweight and like a more power user type offering and actually have a different revenue stream for this. And then you can also use this to differentiate your product to your customers by having a more advanced offering. People really want access to their data, and while they're okay with static dashboards that are embedded, a lot of people want to go beyond that and they want to ask their own questions and they really want to play with the data. They want to upload their own CSVs and join it in and create their own charts and persist them and save them and come back. And this will really drive adoption of your product as well. So some of the key features that people look for when they look at using Sigma for embedding is one is, table stakes is you need to be able to embed dashboards. And I use the word dashboards here, and I'm really talking about workbooks in the Sigma nomenclature. The giving people the ability to explore, not just having static dashboards, like can they drill down? Can they do their own arbitrary filters? Can they look at underlying data? Scale and live query are core facets to the Sigma offering. Can we scale any size data? And can we fit in with the security model that you have? Can we do row level security? Rapid time to value, again, being able to develop a workbook really quickly and deploy it through an iframe. We have customers who do proof of concepts who are able to get an embedded workbook, sometimes in a few hours, maybe a day or two. It's very quick to get your embedded workbook deployed out there. And then some more advanced capabilities around saving, sharing, scheduling, and sending, which I will demo shortly. And then another way to look at these is these different embedded experiences. So I kind of have a spectrum of experiences that you can provide. One is like highly curated. This is like typical dashboard embedding, where it's very much a curated experience. So your customer will click on an analytics link in a portal. They'll see a dashboard, and they could do things like filtering, some pretty simple stuff. And then next, you could also offer up slightly more exploration on top of that. So you could allow them to drill anywhere, or they could use a chart as a filter, or they could download data, or they could look at underlying data. And then finally, you can offer up 80 to 90% of what I would call the Sigma experience. This is most of Sigma application. This is a fairly new feature. If you are familiar with our embedding, we have a new mechanism of embedding, which we're going to cover, called user-backed embedding. Some people may have heard the word safe state embedding. And what this ultimately allows us to do is offer up the ability to save an embedded workbook as your own. And this is all through an embedding, which means you can create workbooks in embedding. You can save them for yourself. You can share them with other people in their company. And this is all done while still integrating with your authentication and still applying row level security. So the full Sigma experience is quite a differentiator, which you can bring to your portal as well. So I mentioned we embed through iframes. So what can be embedded? And there's really three different, what I would call, grains of embedding. And when you go into a workbook and you go into the embedding options, you'll see a menu like you see here on the right-hand side. So you can embed an entire workbook. An entire workbook means essentially multiple dashboards with pages on them, like a page tab navigator in the bottom. The most common option is people will embed a single page, which is a lot like embedding a dashboard. It's got a bunch of charts, filters on there, KPIs, that kind of thing. And then you can also embed an individual visualization, like a single bar chart or a single table element. And this is a fairly common method of embedding as well. But the most common one I see by far is people embedding the entire workbook or a single page experience there that you see. That's the option in the middle. And I'll show you what that looks like in the demo as well.
Hey, John, this is Scott.
Yes.
One question came in. I don't know, you may want to handle this at the end, but the question is an iframe a separate subscription?
Subscription that may be referencing to licensing, I'm guessing. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking that asking a pricing question.
Yeah, and we do cover off the licensing at the very end. And the short answer is probably yes, if it's external embedding. And I'll cover that at the very end.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah. So the way we do embedding is with the iframe. And here's an example of code. If you're not an application developer, don't worry too much about the details here. But really the point of it is, if you look in that black box, that's really it. The embedding is fairly straightforward. Your application is generating a URL, and it goes into an iframe tag. And this is very similar to how YouTube has been embedding for over 20 years now. And what goes into that URL is nuanced, and that's what we'll cover off here. But you go into the workbook and you go into this embedding menu that you see on the right-hand side, and then you'll generate these URLs and you'll add some flags to the URL to make it secure and to specify filters and users and that kind of thing. And then that's it. And this is one of the reasons why it's quick to embed, is that it's embedded as an iframe. And the workbook itself is fairly easy to make inside of Sigma. And this also has benefits for the longer term. It's not only quicker to get out the gate, so your projects won't be as delayed when you're first doing embedding, but the maintenance is going to be less over time. So as your embedding kind of soaks in and it's been out there for, let's say, a year or so, you'll find that the maintenance is very low with the way the embedding works in Sigma. Another reason why our customers like using it and why they keep using it. So most of what I've talked about so far is really around customer or external embedding, which we call application embedding. But we haven't, I don't want to neglect the other types of embedding we have. I'm going to mention them here for completeness, but really the vast majority of the embedding conversations I have are around application embedding for external use cases, embedding for your customers. But for completeness, let me just cover off all the types of embedding right here. So we do have public embedding, something that we've had since day one in our product. Public embedding is exactly what it sounds like. It is public on the internet. You take a workbook and you generate a public embed URL, you give someone that URL, or you embed it in your site, and everyone can see it, and there's no security on it whatsoever. We actually use public embedding. If you go to the Sigma website, and Scott, I don't know if you remember where it is. I think it's on right on the homepage, the live demo link. Is that right?
Yeah, it's linked right off the homepage.
Yeah. So if you go to our homepage, you click on live demo, that's a public embed. And that's one use case of a public embed. And we have some other customers that are using it for like public data sets like Bitcoin transactions or demographics or statistics or education stats, things that are public domain data. And that's what public embedding is. So there are some use cases for it. You're probably not going to sell it as an offering per se, because anyone can see it, but it is very quick to use. And I should also note that there is security inside of Sigma to control who can create a public embed, because you don't want anyone to be able to create a public embed, because they could potentially very easily externalize data that's sitting in your warehouse to end users. The second kind of embedding, there's three total here, is private embedding. And private embedding is mainly designed for internal use cases. For example, you may want to embed Sigma inside of Salesforce, or Sigma inside of Jira, or some kind of application you have internally. And you would leverage the same exact authentication that you use. So like if you have Salesforce and you're authenticating with, let's say, Okta for your single sign-on, then you would also have Sigma authenticating with the same single sign-on with Okta. So now Salesforce and Sigma are authenticating the same way. And then you could take any workbook in Sigma and embed it, do a private embed, let's say in Salesforce, and people in your organization, when they go to Salesforce and they click on the right link, they would see the Sigma workbook embedded in there. And the authentication works because both, in this example, both Salesforce and Sigma are authenticating the exact same way through single sign-on through Okta. It's just as an example. So this is a use case that we see fairly common for internal usage. And going back to the licensing question from a second ago, in this case, the licensing is exactly the same as your regular internal Sigma licensing that you have today. So private embedding is really meant for internal use cases, and it's really a way of getting to Sigma just like you log in normally, but without actually logging into Sigma, just like going in through it through Salesforce as your entry point. So we do have quite a few customers that are using private embedding. And the last one, which is really the heart of what we're talking about today, is application embedding, which is ideal for external use cases. You are embedding analytics or data for your customers. Application embedding will tie into your existing application, or if you're building your own new application, however you're authenticating, it works. We can leverage your existing authentication, and we do this using a trusted key with a signed URL, which you'll hear me mention this many times throughout this presentation. It's the heart of how the security works. Everything is done through the URL. If you look in the bottom right, you'll see this can also be used internally. Although not terribly common, I do see a few customers that will use application embedding internally, even with Salesforce. I just gave an example a minute ago of Sigma embedded in Salesforce using private embedding. You could also embed Sigma in Salesforce using application embedding. So we've done that for a few customers. So if you're interested in that, put a note in the comments and we can follow up with you. But we do have a mechanism to do that. But the most common use of application embedding is for external use cases, for embedding it into your application, which is why we call it application embedding. So now let's just focus on application embedding for the rest of this discussion. So within application embedding, there are these two different, what we call modes, and the mode is specified in the URL. Again, everything is driven through the URL. I'll show you a dissection of the URL in a few minutes here. So up until a few months ago, we had just one type of embedding mode. Now we have two. So the one which we've had for a long time for application embedding is what I call anonymous embedding. You may not see this word in our documentation, but for the purpose of this discussion, this is what we'll call it. And you can either have a view mode or an explore mode. And a view mode is a CAN dashboard, and it's really like it's a very curated experience. Your users can do whatever your workbook lets them do. This explore mode allows your users to drill down or to show underlying data, to add calculations, to change charts, do a lot of the things an explorer can do inside of a workbook. But the main piece of feedback that we got that's missing from this anonymous embedding is, even though you can explore and drill and add calculations and do all that great stuff, you can't save it. So any changes you make are lost when you leave the embed. And that was a bit of a pain point for customers that wanted to let their customers be able to create their own analytics, persist them, and come back later on and open them up. And we've addressed that with this new feature. But if you have, I would say, lighter weight use cases where they're more curated, static, embedded dashboards, the anonymous mode is perfectly fine. And it's also very simple to set up. And the row level security for this one is defined directly inside the workbook on a hidden page. So the mechanics of this are quite simple. And now we have a new method of application embedding, and this is actually still in beta, but it's enabled for everyone. We don't have to turn it on for you. You can just use it, and it's what we call user-backed embedding. And some people may have heard the term save state, but the name that we're using here is called user-backed embedding. And the reason why we call that is because the embedded experience that you give to your customers will be backed by a user. There'll be a user behind the scenes in Sigma. It's a special kind of user called an embed user. And it's all driven by the URL, just like anonymous embedding. But the main difference between user-backed embedding and anonymous embedding is because we have a user behind the scenes that's backing the embedding, it allows us to persist state, which is why some people call it save state. This means that we can save workbooks in the embedded mode. We can share them, we can schedule, we can do alerts. These are all things which require us to persist metadata behind the scenes. And because we had them backed by a user, we now have a far richer experience. And basically we can offer up most of the Sigma experience through embedding. And user-backed embedding also works with our account types, which are kind of like roles, which allow us to give very fine-grained feature permission to different users. What this means is that you can have user-backed embedding. You can give someone a view-only experience, much like a regular viewer, or you can give them very much a power user experience. And I'll show you these different modes when I get to the demo here. And if you look at this, you may say to yourself, well, why would I even need to use anonymous embedding now? And because user-backed embedding can pretty much do everything anonymous embedding can do, plus it can persist state. And the answer to this is it's a bit of a transitional answer, which is Eventually, we are going to have all the functionality that anonymous embedding has inside user-backed. We're pretty close to that right now. And eventually, you may not even need to use anonymous embedding. So that is the direction that we're headed here. There is a little bit of a difference in how row-level security is done with user-backed embedding. It's defined inside of a data set instead of inside of a workbook. And I'll talk about row-level security as well in this presentation. So I've mentioned actually, let me pause there. Scott, are any questions we should get to here? We do
No,
have
I
quite a
think
bit of
you can
content.
keep going.
Yeah.
You can keep going at this point, John.
Okay, great. So I mentioned the embedding URL, and this slide here, I'm not going to go into too much depth right now. This will be available in the handouts, and also we're recording it here. And I'll explain these as I go through demos. It'll make a little bit more sense, but I wanted to provide this for completeness. These are all the different parts that go into an application embedded URL, along with a description of what each one of these do. The key point here, though, is that the URL defines everything. This is how the authentication and the authorization work for your embed, and your application will generate this URL on the fly. That very last one down at the bottom is the signature, and that's what makes the URL secure. So we will go into this in more depth, so don't worry about following it right now. So let's switch gears and talk about something called URL controls, which is actually a feature that you don't even have to use embedding for. This works with embedding or just with regular Sigma. And the idea here is that you can pass in filters and parameters, which generically are just called controls inside Sigma, and you can pass these in through the URL. And this is very useful for embedded use cases. So let's go through an example here. So the first example is, this is an embedded URL. It doesn't have all those additional arguments on there, so it's not a signed URL, but you would still need to add its other things to it. But just to help explain it more clearly, I'm just going to show the core part of the URL here. So if you just embed a workbook and you don't put anything else in there, any optional parameters in there, the filter values of that workbook will be whatever the workbook is published with. So when you publish a workbook, you may have filter controls on there. Whatever values are set at the time of publishing is the value that will be used when the workbook is brought up. But optionally, you can pass in parameters in the URL. So let's say you have a date filter, and the filter's control ID is called start_date. Here you can pass in a filter value so that when the workbook is opened up, it will filter to whatever is passed in the URL. And you can pass in as many of these as you want. So you can pass in year and region. And in this example, we're passing in store region with multiple values, west and east. If you're not familiar with the control ID, here's a screenshot on the right. And the way this works is when you click on the filter in the workbook, you will see the control ID will appear in the properties panel. You can name it whatever you want, but whatever you call it, it will need to end up inside the URL with the same name. So this is how you pass in filters into the URL. And this works again, it doesn't have to be embedded. You can just use a regular Sigma workbook and pass in filters like this. Okay, so let's move to row-level security. RLS is row-level security. And row-level security works different depending on if you're using anonymous embedding or if you're using user-backed embedding. But the concepts are fairly similar, which is they're all specified by the URL. So on the right-hand side, this is an example of an anonymous embedded URL. And there's a lot of parts here, which we don't have to worry about right now, but I've highlighted the ones of importance in blue and red. So on the right-hand side, you'll see merchant equals merchant1. And this is how we do row-level security and anonymous embedding. We can pass in the filter directly in the URL. The assumption here is that your application will know who the user is that's logged in and what data they need to see. So in this example, we're using like a customer ID called merchant1 as a filter. And then somewhere in your workbook, you will, on a hidden page, you will have some logic that looks for the value merchant one and only shows rows where appropriate. So the row level security is handled by passing in a filter value in the URL. So this is actually a quite straightforward way to do row level security. And the hidden page is not visible in anonymous embedding. That's why this is secure. And also this URL cannot be modified. That's because it's a signed URL. So that's what makes it secure. A lot of people say, well, why can't I just copy the URL and change merchant 1 to merchant 2? And the answer is, and I'll show you this in the demo, is it's not possible. It will return an error. And in user-backed embedding, it's a little bit different, because in user-backed embedding, there's a user that's backing the embedding. That's why we call it user back, which means that behind the scenes, we are creating a user on the fly based on what we see in the email. So a lot of people ask me, well, with user backed embedding, do I have to go and create all these users inside Sigma? The answer is no, you don't have to do that. This will happen automatically. We do on the fly embedded user provisioning. So the URL looks a little different. You'll see there's an email address and an external user team. You'll notice there's a colon in front of email and a colon in front of external user team. Anytime you see a colon in front of one of these arguments in the URL, what it means is that it's an internal Sigma parameter in the URL. You would not put a colon, for example, if you were passing in a control ID. So in this example, for user-backed embedding, we have this mode equals user-backed, which tells Sigma that this is a user-backed embed. And once you do that, you are required to have an email and an external user team. So this says who's the user, we'll create on the fly if they don't exist, and what team they belong to. The team is typically like a company that you would have in there. And this is what drives the security mechanism. So in your data set, you will key off of this. We have some special functions which allow you to pull out the team and the email information, and then you can write your row level security around this. The mechanism's a little bit different than the anonymous embedding, but the end result is exactly the same. You can control which rows each user sees and they log in. And this is how the multi-tenanted security is driven here.
Hey, John?
Yes.
There's a question. It's that came in from the audience. Can the external user team param be used in anonymous embeddings as well?
Great question. No, it cannot. So with anonymous embedding, the reason why we call it anonymous is Sigma doesn't know who it is. We don't have any idea of the email or team. That being said, we can still achieve the same type of row level security. So in this example up top, I have merchant equals merchant one. You can pass, this is how we're doing row level security for anonymous embedding, is we're passing in filter values. And you can pass in as many of these as you want. So you could put in your own user ID and your own team ID. They wouldn't be like Sigma users and Sigma teams, but you could put in your own filters in the anonymous URL and filter your data however you want, and it would still be secure. But they're not first-class teams or users with anonymous embedding, because it truly is an anonymous URL.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
Thanks.
hopefully that makes sense, and I hope the demo will clarify a little bit.
Yeah, I'm sure the
So
demo will help. Thanks.
yeah, so note on JavaScript hooks. So we do have some nice mechanisms here which allow you to communicate between your application and the Sigma embedded iframe. So we have events and we have actions, and events get propagated out from the Sigma iframe out to your parent iframe, and actions have the reverse direction. There are things that you take action inside your application, and then you can post into the iframe. So some examples of these. Here we have events, and the main event that we support, there's a few of them, but the main one that people use is when a control is changed. So if someone is looking at an embedded Sigma workbook and they change one of the filters, you can detect that in your parent iframe. This can be very useful to know what your user is filtering on in the parent iframe. And then you can also do the opposite, which is in your parent iframe, you can change a filter value in Sigma. You don't need to call a whole new Sigma embedded URL and force a page load. You can dynamically have your application change a filter value inside of a Sigma embedded iframe using a JavaScript post message. And you'll just see the filter will just automatically change. So you can also use these in tandem. This is very useful if you have like multiple workbooks embedded in your site, and you may want to persist some kind of state across those. Like maybe someone filters on a date for the last 7 days, and then later on they click on some other embedded page, and you want to be able to kind of capture that change and pass it in. So these events and actions give you the mechanism to do that. Dev to prod, which is short for development to production, is not so much a feature as it is a workflow with several features involved with it. And this is currently listed as a beta feature. In this case, if you want to access this one, you'll need to send a message to our support team. They should be able to enable it for you quite quickly. It's just flipping a switch on our back end. And the general workflow here is you would create a workbook, and then you would test it. And when it comes time to deploy it, and this could be a version 1 or version 2 or version 10, whatever it is, you will use this option called copy workbook and sources. And you'll see in the lower right was a flag called beta. And this will only appear if the feature has been enabled for you. And what it does is it creates a deep copy of the workbook, which means all the dependencies will be copied. And you can also rewire it. It'll walk you through. There'll be a nice little UI, which will walk you through how you can remap the workbook and all of its dependencies to, for example, a new connection or to a new database. You may have a dev database and a prod database. So this deep copy feature will allow you to do that rewiring on the fly. And then there's another feature which will reassign an existing embed URL to a new copy of a workbook. So this means that once you generate the embedded URL, that URL is static for the lifetime of the embed. So this is nice because you don't have to go back to your application team and have them change the URL there. You can have that URL mapped to a new version of the workbook. And we're going to pick up the pace a little bit because I do want to get to the demo here. I'll mention for completeness, we do have themes. I think we covered this off in an earlier webinar here, but this lets you customize the look and feel of your workbook. Now, to make everything secure, we've talked a lot about this URL. The URL it can only be used once. So the way it works is we have this thing called a nonce, which is basically a randomly generated number or key, which your application will generate. And you put it into the URL, and then you use the secret. You generate the secret inside of Sigma, and you keep that secret in a safe location. That's why we call it a secret here. And you're going to run one line of code, which we have in our documentation, to hash the nonce and the URL along with the secret, which generates a signature, and then you sign the URL. And because it's signed with the secret key, when Sigma sees it, we're able to do the same computation on our side and check the signature is valid. And that means that we trust your application. And this is how the authentication works. So as long as your secret is kept safe with you, then all the authentication is completely secure. And a lot of applications use this method for embedding because it works so well. And you can generate keys in multiple places inside of Sigma. You can do what I call an org master key, which is on the main admin page under account. There's also a fairly new UI called APIs and embed secrets, where you can generate keys, both embedded and API keys. They're different types of keys, but you can generate these keys per user. That's a nice way if you want to give out embedded keys to developers, for example, and the permissions on those keys will also match the permissions that those users have, which also allows for key rotation. Okay, so let's jump into a demo and see what this looks like. So I have a workbook here. This is just regular old Sigma here with a workbook. And we can embed this workbook. And the way you embed it is you'll go over to menu and choose embedding. And you can choose what you want to embed right here. You can see it says generate application for the embed. And you can choose those 3 different grains. You can choose to embed the entire workbook, an individual page, or an individual viz. And down below, this one happens to have a lot of embeds. You can see there are different embed URLs for the different things that are being embedded. So a lot of times you'll just have one embedded URL for a workbook. This is kind of an unusual example where there are many embedded URLs, but the most common thing is you would see just one page being embedded here. And that URL that you see will be the backbone of the URL that you generate. So let me show you what anonymous embedding looks like and then user-backed embedding. So that same workbook is being embedded into this fictitious application here. So this to show you what it looks like. This might be like the portal that you log into for your user. You could log in as a user, let's say guest, a user called Merchant One. This is authenticating to your application. This is like your own authentication mechanism here. And then maybe there's a link somewhere in your application called analytics. They click on that and they see this embedded iframe. So much of the screen here is the iframe. You can see as I'm scrolling here, the blue bar at the top is basically your application, and everything else down here is the embedded iframe. And we have controls over here. This is kind of normal workbook stuff, I would say. And in this case, we also have the ability to do explorations. Like you can do drill anywhere, for example. And this is part of the anonymous embed explore experience. You could even get to like underlying data if you wanted to, or you could download data. These are some of the explore options. But the main thing anonymous embedding does not have is the ability to save those changes. That's where the user-backed embedding comes in. For the purpose of demonstration, we had the embedded URL here. So the entire iframe that you see is embedded by your application generating this URL that you see here. The main parts of this URL are first is the embed itself. This is what you get from the previous screen where I went to that embedded menu here. That's where you get the embedded URL. And this uniquely identifies the object that's being embedded, like the workbook page. Here we are doing the row level security through the URL here. And in this example, merchant is a control on a hidden page. So if I edit this workbook, if you look in the lower left, you'll see that there's a hidden page called data. And this is how anonymous embedding does security, is there's a control here. It can be more than one as well. And it has a control ID called merchant. And this is what it's doing is it's filtering on the table here. Now everyone's row level security is going to look different. In this example, it's pretty simple. I have a value here called merchant, where the value is either merchant 2 or merchant 1. And if we pass in merchant 1 through the URL, this gets set to merchant 1, and otherwise it gets set to merchant 2. And you may say, well, what if I just took this whole URL and I copied it and I want to give it to someone else, or I want to change it? So if I try to use it again, I get an error. And you'll see it says the nonce has already been used. So each URL could only be used once. The reason why we have that word nonce in there is it's once and only once. The URL can only be used once. It's a disposable URL. And since I already used it over here, I couldn't use it again. Further, let's say I didn't use the URL. And let's say I was able to generate it. Let's say I was really sneaky and I generated the URL. I gave it to someone and I said, and then that person tries to change merchant 1 to merchant 2. So I know it's a little bit small, but if you look here in the top of my URL bar, I'm going to change merchant 1 to merchant 2, and I'm going to try to hack the URL. And what I get is a different error message, which is the signature is invalid. So the way the URL works, the way it's generated, is you will add the row level security to the URL, and then you sign it using the secret key. The signature is based on all the contents in the URL. If anything in that URL changes, whether it's the row level security information, the nonce, anything in the URL, the signature will no longer match the rest of the URL. And that's why the signature is now invalid here. So this URL is one-time use only, and it's also, it cannot be modified. And that's what makes this so secure. So it may look a little odd at first if you're not used to seeing this, that we're passing in security information in plain text in a URL. Everyone's kind of alarm goes off and says, well, that can be changed, it's not secure. But the signature is what makes it secure. So there's no way to hack it. And we have, for those people interested, we have the security penetration tests available for this. We've had external companies audit our row level security mechanism and all of application embedding to make sure that there's no way to hack into this. There's some other things in this URL like the session expiration time, but we're not going to get into those right now. Another thing that's noteworthy is this mode parameter. It says mode equals explore. So this means it's anonymous embedding. If it says mode equals view or mode equals explore, it's anonymous embedding. So that's what anonymous embedding looks like. And let me show you what the user-backed embedding looks like. So this is going to look a little bit different just because my demo environment's different. But from an end user perspective, you can make this look exactly the same as anonymous embedding. But the difference is going to be is how you generate the URL. So in this demo, just for demonstration purposes, instead of having a menu bar at the top like in my previous demo, I have 5 different users listed up here. And these users are on different teams, team 1 and team 2. And team 1 is customer 1, team 2 is customer 2. So this is going to demonstrate quite a few concepts of user-backed embedding here. Let me just reload this page here. So the first thing you'll notice in the URL is we're passing in the user, the email here, and the team. So the user, if it already exists, Sigma will reuse the user, which means if there's any documents this user has saved, we can reuse them. And we also have the team, which the user gets dynamically assigned to that team on the fly. The team will need to exist ahead of time. If you want to create these teams in bulk, we also have an API, which allows you to do that. And then we have this mode equals user-backed, and this tells Sigma that we're doing user-backed embedding. And the rest of the URL is fairly similar. We still have the signature and all the properties of you can't modify it still apply. But what's great about user-backed embedding is someone could do some changes here, like they could drill down here, and then on the lower right, you'll see they have the ability to save the workbook. So they can say save as, and we can call this webinar demo. And right now I'm logged in as this user called Alfonso. He's part of team 1. And Alfonso saves his workbook here. And now this is his own copy. So we can go in here and we can call this the webinar demo. And we're going to publish this. And basically I'm inside of Sigma right now. If I wanted to, I could even add new data elements. I could add new tables, key them off of news sources. I can do whatever I want over here. We'll just publish this right here. And then if I go in this menu on the lower left, I have some options here. I can do things like schedule. I can create a schedule for this. I can email it out, Slack it. This is all of our scheduling from our product. We can put custom conditions on there. If a certain condition's met, then send it out. So we can use this for alerting. So your customers can create their own custom alerts if you give them the ability to do that. And this is controllable. The privilege to do this is controllable through account types. So you can offer this through the embedding experience. Now, if I log in as this other user called Franklin, who's on the same team, row level security is being applied here. It may not be obvious, but if you look at the sales quantity of 120,000 here on the left, and if I flip over to this other user, you'll see the sales quantity is different. So what this means is that we're applying row level security behind the scenes. And the way we're doing that is by keying off of the email. So behind the scenes, we have a data set, and the data set is using the email information to decide what rows to see. Now, If I go back in as Alfonso, let's say Alfonso comes in a day later and he lands on the initial embedded page, which the initial embedded page hasn't changed, but I saved that document before. Where did my document go? Well, it's down here in my documents folder. So there's my webinar demo. And now Alfonso can pull up the workbook, which he modified a day ago, let's say. And only he can see it right now. And row level security is still being applied. And in addition to scheduling it, what Alfonso can also do is he can share it. And the way this will work is by moving it into a workspace. We have a workspace set up for Team 1. A workspace is like a shared folder. And Alfonso can move it here if he wants to share it with other people in that workspace. And now if I come in as this user called Franklin, so let's say a new user logs in called Franklin, he's part of the same company, and he has his own My Documents, which look totally different, but he also has access to the same common workspace. And there's my webinar demo I just created. So now Franklin can open up a shared workbook. Now Franklin doesn't have edit privileges on this workbook, but he can save a personal copy if he likes. And if I go in as a different user, let's say this user is called Brendan, he's on team 2. Brendan doesn't have access to the same workspace. He's on a different company. He can't see that document at all. So this is only shared within the company, and you can control however you want to set up the workspaces here. Now, Brendan is also configured as a custom account type, where Brendan has the ability to save workbooks, but you'll see that these schedule, export, and send now are grayed out. So this is using the custom account types. And we've also locked out the ability for Brendan to be able to download data. And the way we accomplish this, in the URL, there's an optional parameter called account type. And I created a custom account in Sigma called Explorer Lite. You can create them with whatever names you want. And I restricted this user from being able to do things like schedule or download data here. So that's a quick through of how the user-backed embedding works. There is a lot more features which I've omitted just for the sake of time. But the key points here is that you can really offer up the vast majority of the Sigma experience through user-backed embedding. You see there's also a link up here at the top for a viewer. If you wanted to have a viewer user, you can do that as well. Let me just show you this real quickly. When I click on Sophie as a viewer here, you look in the lower right, what you'll see is the absence of the Save As button. So what we've done here is we've used user-backed embedding to create a viewer type of experience by specifying the account type equals viewer. So this is very flexible, what you can do with user-backed embedding. We're almost out of time here. Documentation, this will be in the handouts. Again, the documentation really has everything you need to get started here. And a final word on licensing. This was asked earlier on in the presentation. So there's this concept of internal users and external users. And internal users are people that are at your company. So you've licensed Sigma, you have a subscription to it. And anyone that you license internally for usage is what we call an internal user. This is our typical creator, explorer, and viewer users. Viewer users are free in Sigma. So they'll work at your company. And then external is, these are your customers, or our customers' customers, which would be your customers. These are external users, and they are licensed differently, is kind of a short answer. And I can't go into the specifics because it's fairly complicated and depends on what kind of experience you're providing to your customers. But you should know that external licensing is separate from your internal licensing. So if you're not sure, ask your account manager. But if you want to do application embedding for external customers, you will need to make sure you have your licensing set up for that. So a little fast there at the end, but Scott, let me hand this up to you, back to you, just for final wrap up here.
Yeah, thanks, John. You covered so much. It was fantastic. Thanks a lot. We may need to go a couple minutes over if people can hang on this last little bit. For resources, in addition to the documentation, you can always go to help.sigmacomputing.com and reference that document that's attached in GoToWebinar in the handouts. That's another place that Jon referenced. And continuing on, and the Q&A, do we have time for a couple questions or just go?
Well, why don't we keep this up here just so people can see our next webinar. But if it's a question that you see down there, Scott, please do call it out right now.
Okay. So is custom CSS supported or will it be?
Great question. Custom CSS, cascading style sheets, is typically used by people to customize the look and feel. And we do not support CSS right now, and we have no plans to support it. And the reason why is that it has a lot of compatibility issues to support CSS, and it kind of adds a tax to our development cycle, which would slow down the feature cadence. So I would say if you have specific things you're looking to see supported, if you want to use your own CSS because maybe you want to change the background color or whatever it is, let our support team know so we can file an enhancement request. The way we're doing this is we're adding them to themes. So we take all the common requests there, and we have slowly added these to themes over time. So if you look at themes today, you can do font control, you can upload your own custom fonts, you can change borders and spacing and that kind of thing. But there is no ability to do full-blown custom CSS. But we do intend to extend the themes on an as-needed basis.
Okay, great. Yeah, somebody chimed in saying that would be great to have more customization options.
Yeah.
Another last question, but the URL would work if different users access to the same company page containing the same embedded URL.
I'm not sure I'm following what the question
Yeah,
is
I'm
there.
not sure either. I think what they're talking is that if it's not user backed, because user backed, you said it has those throwaway URLs. If
Yeah,
it's not user backed, then the same URL will work
I
for
see.
everybody in the company that has permission, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You could use, if you're doing like application embedding and you have the same application embed URL for different users, they'll just see the same thing. And that would be like the simplest case of, hey, I have a dashboard, I want to embed it in my application. I don't really care about the row level security and having them have different views. They can all use the same URL. That would be totally fine. The main difference is the URL does get signed each time. So it's not a static URL that you're embedding. You'll be generating it each time. Your application will be generating it and signing it.
Okay,
Unless
fantastic.
it's an internal use case where you would use private embedding, in which case the URL is static for the lifetime.
Yep. Well, I think if anybody on the call has more questions, I'd suggest you set up a time with the Sigma team to ask them, or you can email support and ask them. If you're new to Sigma, you can also check out our free trial, or you can share it with other folks that may be interested. And we're going to have another What's New in Sigma webinar in about a month on Thursday, May 19th at the same time, 10 a.m. Pacific. So that is just got posted. And we also do a monthly virtual hands-on lab webinar that is live. And the next one will be Thursday, April 28th at 10 a.m. Pacific. And you can also watch replays of that one if you want to be able to pause and start and go at your own leisure. But I think that's everything for today. Thank you so much for hanging on. I hope this has been useful. And thank you, Jon, for all your effort putting this together. And all the best to you and have a wonderful day. Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone. Bye-bye.